Hello everybody and welcome back. As always, I am Mateo311 and this is your channel for everything VR related. Today, we're discussing how the Quest ruined one of my favorite VR games. Trust me, this video isn't what you're expecting and you'll need to hear the whole thing out. I'm not here to crap on the Quest, and the game in question is actually pretty good, but the current state of the VR industry and its Quest-centric nature has changed the title that I treasured into a game I couldn't care less for. I will eventually name this mystery title, but we need to work up to it as to properly explain the situation surrounding this game. And we'll also be going into the current state of VR game development, which will help to explain why we're not seeing any AAA titles. I'd love to hear down in the comments right now how you're feeling about the current VR game releases. Now there are of course links and timestamps if you just can't wait and want to skip ahead, but let's start things off with the VR industry's current conundrum. It's undeniable that VR has been stuck in a catch-22 for an extended period of time. Originally, it was too expensive and people weren't willing to pay top dollar for hardware that had no games. Developers couldn't heavily invest in VR titles because the player base was too small and there was no profit to be made. We saw this specifically with studios like Ubisoft and Bethesda, who started off looking to cash in on the VR hype, but quickly realized there was no money to be made and delivered us some mediocre projects like the 90-minute Wolfenstein Cyberpilot. Now we can spend an entire video on the VR failings of AAA studios, but there were two major companies willing to invest in VR games. Both Valve and Meta invested a lot of money and either funded or produced their own much bigger budget VR titles. Unfortunately though, this just wasn't enough to move the needle. While Half-Life Alyx did have a significant impact on the industry, unless we continue to get 4 or 5 Half-Life Alyx sized games every single year, VR just wasn't growing at the rate it needed to. So Meta's solution was their mobile subsidized headset, the Quest, and its predecessor, the Quest 2. 20 million sales later, and VR finally has the player base it deserves. The only issue now is the leading VR hardware is severely limited and requires a pretty significant amount of developer optimization. So while we can now deliver VR to the masses, we're unable to produce those higher end titles that came out in 2017 through 2019. So this is the main reason why VR is stuck on smaller mini-game style experiences. This has caused a lot of OG VR gamers to resent the Quest, but the sheer fact is PCVR isn't profitable. Now there are some obvious exceptions like Half-Life Alyx, Boneworks, and a few other earlier VR titles, but for the most part, you're more likely making money supporting an NFT scam than developing exclusively for PCVR. The PCVR community is also extraordinarily critical, with extremely high expectations. While I try to compare VR games as a whole, putting each new release against the competition from the Quest 2 or PlayStation VR 2, PCVR gamers on the other hand are actively comparing their titles against AAA flat-screen games. That's an excellent way to set yourself up for disappointment, and yet again another topic that deserves its own separate video. But right before we get to that game that the Quest has ruined for me, this video is brought to you by VR Rock. VR Rock makes prescription lens inserts for all of your favorite VR headsets, and now they have them for the PlayStation VR 2. So if you've been struggling to get your eyeglasses to fit inside the headset, or you're afraid you might scratch the lens, these can be a great option. They magnetically connect, so they're easy to put on and take right back off. And if you're interested, I have a 10% discount code down in the description and a link to their webpage. The name drop is coming, but first, imagine the 2016 version of Doom was brought into VR. That brutally intense fast-paced action, rock music blasting in the background, and hordes of unique enemies to dispatch. Now on top of that, add made-for-VR mechanics like a grappling hook, weapons that respond to motion gestures, and melee combat that fuels your adrenaline. And if this wasn't already enough, add in a drop of Diablo with both stat-based weapons and a unique leveling system. Now this might already be sounding too good to be true, but it also has Half-Life Alyx level graphics and set in its own unique Egyptian-style world. This is everything the early access version of Everslaught offered us, and I've been continually singing this game's praises and itching to experience more of the title. Currently, as it stands, the PCVR version offers roughly a 60-minute single-player linear campaign-like experience, and then it turns itself into a roguelike game where you continuously go on blood runs, find new weapons, face increasingly more difficult enemies, and level up. This was more than enough to sell the experience for me, and I eagerly wanted more, but development stopped and a new Quest version was announced. Now from here, I want to be very clear that I do not blame the developers. Now I reached out to MobX for an update, but I was already about 95% sure I knew what had happened. The PC early access release of Everslaught wasn't successful, and the studio even took a loss making it. By the time the title had launched, most of the hype surrounding PCVR was gone, and with the money from early access sales alone, it was going to be tough to continue developing this game. But clearly others saw some potential here, And that's when they started working with publisher Fast Travel Games. Together, they came up with a brand new concept inspired by the original PCVR version. And now we have an entirely different game, which is what stung me the most. Sure, new additions like 2-player co-op and multiple classes sounded intriguing, but I really just wanted more of what we already had. I want the fleshed out Everslaught experience, not a new Horde mode game. And again, I have to point out that Everslaught Invasion is by no means a bad game. In fact, it's quite fun to play with a buddy, but it's just not at all the same title. Everslaught Invasion has been remade for the masses. Their main objective is fun, it doesn't induce the same amount of adrenaline, and those absolutely amazing graphics have been super questified. Now I'm sure many individuals are ready to call MobX sellouts for moving to the Quest, and I'm sure I'll get some crap too for even remotely sounding like I'm defending them. But we have to understand that game development is a business, and working with Fast Travel Games is an excellent opportunity. While MobX might not be able to create their original vision, they now actually have a path of being profitable and can still work on a project that they're proud of. It doesn't make any sense to pour your heart, soul, and all your money into something that just won't benefit you in the long run. MobX still wants to support their original vision, but either something will need to change in the VR industry, or it will have to significantly grow. Maybe a combination of the Quest 3 and PlayStation VR 2 can make it a possibility, and they are still holding on to hope. Now, in terms of reviewing Everslaught Invasion, that's not happening in this video. If you've noticed, I'm avoiding going into many specifics regarding this game, or giving you my overall opinion. I was originally asked to provide sponsored content for this game, but ultimately ended up turning it down. There's definitely an audience for this game, I like all the new features they've added, and I definitely had a lot of fun playing it. 90 minutes flew by in the blink of an eye, and if you enjoyed titles like the Horde mode in Arizona Sunshine, or something similar to After the Fall, you'll really enjoy what Everslaught Invasion brings to the table. But it's just not at all the same as the PCVR version, and since I'm absolutely in love with that experience, my disappointment wouldn't allow me to create sponsored content. It would almost feel like a betrayal to my audience, because the whole time I was playing, I just kept thinking about this is not the game I wanted. In hindsight, I could have treated this as a completely different game and helped MobX showcase the exciting gameplay that's coming to the Quest 2, but my heart just wasn't really in it. I do wish the team a ton of success and hope they're able to eventually get back to the original PCVR version. But for right now, we just have to accept that Quest is king. Previous games like Onward have felt the impact from the Quest, which originally required the PCVR version to be downgraded in order to support crossplay. With the Quest 2 as the primary focus for development, the scope of a game already starts out with some major limitations. Factor in additional time needed for optimization, lower overall production budgets, and VR just keeps handing us short, shallow games. Now we're hoping 2023 will be the year this changes, as the PlayStation VR 2 has already started introducing much bigger games. It makes sense for those titles to eventually make it onto PCVR. And finally, the Quest 3, releasing later this year, should be a pretty significant update. Performance-wise, it should be similar to going from the Quest 1 to the Quest 2, so I'm not sure if it's strong enough to bring us into higher level quality games, such as Half-Life Alyx, but it's at least a good step forward. Only time will tell, but I'm really curious where you think the VR industry is going. Please let me know down in the comments right now.
And that was today's video, brought to you by my dad, Mateo311. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you're new here,
Consider subscribing.
consider subscribing.
Consider subscribing.
Consider subscribing.
Consider subscribing. We'll see you guys on next time.
We'll see you guys on next time.